Welcome back, Power App enthusiasts, to the Power App tutorial channel. We are continuing with part 3 of our Remastered series, and this time around we're going to be focusing on our animal table. So we are going to be creating this table in the Dataverse, which has 21 columns all the way from microchip ID all the way to next vet. And we also have 50 rows that we are going to import into the Dataverse. But before we begin, if you're new here, make sure you hit that subscription button, add that notification bell so you can stay updated when we come up with new videos, and give the video a thumbs up if you learned something new. All right, if you guys are ready, let's just jump right into it. All right, to build this in the Dataverse and ensure we don't miss any columns, we are going to be building this from left to right, like I said before. And we're starting with the microchip ID. And what we're going to do is this time, as we're building it, we'll be discussing our thought processes in choosing our data types. Now, I have prepared another table called animal table. And the difference between sheet 1 and animal table is it's missing the photo 2. So this photo 2 column here that holds the URL, it's not in the animal table, which is fine because we're not actually going to be including that in our table in the Dataverse. So I've switched over to animal table now, and this is what we're going to be building off of. And like I said, the only difference between that table and sheet 1 is it's missing the photo 2 column. All right, if you guys are ready, let's just jump right into the Dataverse and start building these columns along with the table. All right, see you there. All right, so we are back in the shelter solution on Power Apps, and we have our 2 tables, and we need a new table. So let's go up top to new, go down to table, and hit table again. And then now display name, we're going to put in animal information is what I put in for the display name. Plurals comes in dynamically. And then for description, I put store animal information in the Dataverse. And that's for the properties tab. So switch over to the primary column tab, and we're going to rename this. So if you remember, we had microchip ID for our primary columns in our animal table. We're going to put ours as microchip ID too. So rename this to microchip ID. And when you're done renaming it microchip ID, so the primary column should have display name as microchip ID. I put a space in mine. You don't have to in yours. And then for the properties, it should have animal information and it should look like this. And when you're done, hit save to create our new table with the first column. All right, our table is being created and we have our table completed. And I'm just going to go straight to our columns so we can continue creating our columns. So click on columns to go to columns. And if we go back to our Excel spreadsheet, the next one is going to be our name. So let's hit new column and let's name our first column. So I named my pet's name. Like I said before, I've created this solution before, so I'm trying to avoid clashes in my column names. You can just name yours name without the pet prefix, but I named my pet name to avoid clashes. And then for description, I just put the name of the pet. And then for data type, We are going to leave it as single line of text. Format is going to be text. Behavior simple, required optional. This looks good. Once you're done with this, hit save. And we have our second column created. All right, so let's move on to the third column, which is going to be a type column. Now, I want you guys to take notes that these are recurring sequences coming up twice and in other places. And if you hit the drop down, you can see it's not a large list. So we have a list of animal types from bearded dragon all the way down to tortoise. I'm going to create this as a choice column in the Dataverse. So if you guys are excited, we're going to create our first choice column for the animal table. All right, to create our choice column, just like before, we hit on new column. And for our display name, I'm going to put in pet type. And for description, just type of pet. For data type, we are going to be picking a choice column, like I said. So go down and pick choice again. And after selecting choice, leave the behavior as simple, leave required as optional. Our choice field doesn't need to have multiple choice allowed, so leave this off. Do not check it on. For synchronize with global choices, we are going to modify this, so don't leave it as yes. Switch it to no. I try to fill my choice fields. I always try to do it in alphabetical order. So the easiest way to do this is if you go back to your Excel table and you click on the drop down for the type, you will see Excel has actually done that for you and arranged it in alphabetical order. So I would suggest opening this on another screen. If you don't have another screen, you can divide your screen into two and then add in the names in this order. Now to add a name into a choice column field, all you need to do is just click on the first label. And we're going to enter the first one, which should be the bearded dragon. And I'm going to change the value to 1 also. And after that, hit new choice to enter the next one. The next one on our list is Bud Gerigar. And then there's cats, and then chameleon and cockatiel. All right, let's just go ahead and add those. Awesome. I like to make my values specific to me. And then there was a cat. And then and then the next one was a chameleon. And it's the same process. So we are going to add all of them. And I'll meet you when I'm done adding the rest of them, but just the same process. So just add a new one each time until we get all the way down to tortoise. I will see you in a minute. Okay, so we are back and we have all 16 of the animal types. Now make sure that you have the spelling correct. No small letter B and capital letter D. Make sure that the spellings are all correct. Even for the llama, make sure you have a capital letter L and then a small letter L. And then when you're done and your choice field looks exactly like this, hit save. And let us move on to the next column. And if we look at our table again, the next column is going to be the date of birth. And that's going to be a date column. So click on new column again, and let's enter date of birth. And I name my pet's date of birth, and description is pet's date of birth. For data type, we are going to be using a date column. So go to date and time, and on the side drop down, instead of picking date and time, pick date only. So data type is going to be date and time, and the format is going to be date only. Behavior is going to be simple. Required is optional. Leave it like that, and let's hit save to create this column. The next column on our list is going to be the age. And since age is based on an animal's date of birth, we are going to be turning this into our first calculated column. If you haven't created a calculated column, it is pretty easy to create a calculated column. It's the same process. We go to new column, and let's name this column pet age. All right, so for the display name, I put in pet age. The description is the age of pet calculated from pet's date of birth. And then we're going to convert this to a calculator column. So for the data type, instead of single line of text, go down to the bottom and pick the formula. And we are going to be putting into this formula our calculation. So we're first going to grab the date of birth, type in pet's date of birth. So now that we've gotten the pet's date of birth, we need something to compare it to. So let's add a formula called dates difference to the beginning. And put the pet's date of birth in parentheses for the date difference. And then after pet date of birth, put a comma. And like I said, we need something to compare it to. So we'll compare it to today. So type in now to compare it to today. And put it in parentheses too. And then we need to return it in a time value that we can actually read. And that's where we're going to use time units in years. And then close that in a bracket. And this is going to be our formula for getting us the pet age using the pet's date of birth column. And once that's done, you can open the options, the advanced options. And if you open the advanced options, as you can see, it's coming out as decimal. We're going to switch that to a whole number. Leave the format as none, and then hit save to create our first calculated column, the pet age. All right, now that's done, let's move on to our next column. Our next column is going to be the sex. And as you can see, it's a sequence of values that keep repeating themselves. And just like before, my thought process is to create a choice column. We only have two choices here, female and male, which makes it way easy. So let's go straight and create our sex, animal sex. And I'm going to name this pet sex, description, sex of pet. And for our data type, we are going to be choosing choice. So choice and choice. Leave the behavior as simple, required as optional. This is not a multi-choice, so just leave that unchecked. And then for synchronize with global choice, switch it from yes to no. And let's create our choice column here. Start with female. I'm gonna change this to 1, just like before. And our second choice is male. Change this to 2. And we're actually done. Hit save to finish this column. Our next column is going to be medical conditions. For medical conditions, it looks like another column that has set of repeating values. And if we click on the drop-down menu, the list is not that long. So I'm going to also convert this into a choice column. And I'm also going to create a called none, just so it can be represented when we are actually looking at it in a Dataverse and we are creating our model-driven app. So let's go back to our solution and our animal table, and we're going to create our new column called medical conditions. All right, so I named it pet medical conditions. The description is medical conditions of the pet. For data type, like I said, we're going to make this a choice column. So choose choice and choice. Leave the behavior simple, required, optional. This is not a multiple choice, so leave the multiple choice off. And then for synchronize with global choice, we're going to pick no, so we can create our choice fields inside our column. And just like before, I like my choice fields in alphabetical order. So I'm going to click on the drop down for medical conditions, and I'm going to add it based on Excel's list. Allergies is first, and then anxiety and arthritis. So let's just go over here. Allergies. Okay, so we are back and we have allergies, anxiety, arthritis, diabetes, hip dysplasia, dysplasia, and none. And for default choice, I want you to click the drop down for the default choice. And we are going to pick our own none. So just pick the last none. And then once that's done, you're like this. Hit save. And we should have our medical conditions column created. Let's create our next column. Our next column is going to be medical treatments. And just like before, this is going to also be a choice column, starting from behavior therapy all the way down to prescription medication. And like I said, I like it in alphabetical order. So let's just go straight and start creating this column. And just like before, we hit on new column. And for our display name, all right, so the display name, I put in pet medical treatments, and the description is medical treatments of pets. And for our data type, we are going to be using the choice column, choice and choice again. And leave the behavior simple, required, optional, search, leave it on. For selecting multiple choices, do not check that. Synchronizes with global choices, let's change that to no. And then let's enter our first field, which should be behavioral therapy. That looks good. I'm going to change the value to 1. And then for new choice, we go back to our table in Excel. The next one is insulin therapy. So I'm just going to go ahead and add this in alphabetical order from behavioral therapy all the way down to prescribed medication. And I'll see you guys in a minute. Okay, and we are back, and I want you to take note of the spelling. So we have a capital letter B and a small letter T. And the same thing applies to the other fields. So make sure that the spelling looks exactly like this. And this was gotten straight from the Excel sheet. We are trying to avoid issues when we are importing this data in. So I want it to look like the exact duplicate of the Excel spreadsheet. All right, so once we are done filling this out and making sure that your choice fields look like this, for the default choice, click the drop-down menu and pick our none, and then hit save. All right, so that should be that with our medical treatments column. The next column is going to be our initial shelter. Let's move this all the way to the side since we're done with the ones on the left. So we're starting with the initial shelter, which is the next column. And as you can see, this column has a sequence of values that repeats themselves. S2 comes up a couple of times. And if you've noticed, it has the same values that we saw when we were building our shelter home. So this is going to be a lookup field to our shelter table. So let's just go ahead and create this right now. Going back to the Dataverse. To create a lookup column, just like I said, a lookup column is what connects one table to another table. And we're trying to create a lookup column from our animal table to our shelter table. That's the lookup we're trying to create. So make sure you're on your animal table. Go to the column section. Click on new column. And this is how we're going to be creating our relationship. So I'm going to name this. All right, so I call this pets initial shelter for the display name. And description is the initial shelter of the pet, simple and sweet. For data type, it's going to be a lookup. So click on data and click on lookup. And then for required, leave it as optional. And then for where it says related table, this is where we're going to search for our shelter information table. And just make sure you pick the right table. And then hit save to create a lookup to our shelter table. Awesome. And that is how you create a relationship between one table and another. Let's move on with the rest of our columns. So the next on our list is going to be our current location. Now, current location, we are going to push this to the end of the video, mostly because if you look at the current location, it has a sequence of numbers that repeat themselves. Some of them have the S and some of them have an FH pre-value. And if you see, it corresponds to either the initial shelter or it corresponds to the foster claimer column. So we're going to create this once we are done creating our foster claimer. So we're just going to push this for now. We're just going to hold off on this and then move on to the next column. And the next column is going to be our photo column. So let's just go ahead and create our photo column in the Dataverse. All right. And for the display name, call this pet photo. Description, photo of pet, short and sweet. For data type, we are going to be using an image for the data type. So click on the drop down menu, and to pick an image, go to File. So go to the file, and for the drop down for the file, pick image. And we're also going to make this a primary image. So make sure you check the primary image and then hit save to create our column. And onto the next column. Hope you guys are having fun. We are almost done. Our next column is the shelter status. And as you can see, it has a set of values that repeat themselves. So this is definitely going to be a choice column. I am going to add one more field to this choice column, and that's going to be a field called claim for foster. And that's going to be my control choice field. So if you guys are ready, let's just go ahead and create this in the Dataverse. So same process, make sure you're on the animal information table and then click on new column. And I'm going to name this, all right, so I named this pet shelter status, and the description is the shelter status of the pet. For data type, like I said, it's going to be a choice column. So choose choice and choice again. Leave the behavior as simple, required optional. Do not select multiple choices. And then for global choice, turn it to no, and let's input our first one. And our first one is adopted. Thank you. The first one is going to be adopted. And the other ones, let's go back to our table. So for shelter status, I'm going to use the Excel drop down again. First one is adopted, and then claim for adoption all the way down to ready for foster. And I'll see you guys in a minute once I've done incorporating this. Okay, so I am back, and like I said, we have created the choice fields all the way from adopted to ready for foster according to the Excel spreadsheet. And then one more field was added, which is the claim for foster. And like I said, this is going to be my control field. And once you're done and your shelter status column looks like this, hit save. And your column should be ready once it's done saving. All right. At this point, if you need to stretch your feet and grab some coffee, go ahead and do that. I'm going to continue on. The next one is going to be our foster claimer column. Now, as you can see, if you remember the last table we made, which is the foster information, had this for its primary column. So this is also going to be your lookup field to the foster information table. So let's just go ahead and create this. I'm on my animal information again, and then click on new column. And for display name, we're going to put in, and I put for the display name pest foster claimer. the description is the foster claimer of the pet. And for data type, like I said, we're going to be using a lookup field to our foster family information table. So click on lookup and then lookup again. Leave the required as optional. For related table, let's look for our table, which is the foster family table. So the foster family information table is the one we are looking for because it corresponds to the one in our solution. So once this looks good, just hit save to create a lookup. And that should be it for that column. On to the next one. And our next column is going to be the adopter. And this looks like it's going to be a single line of text. It's just the names of the adopter. So let's just go back in and create this. So new column. All right, so I named it pet adopter. And for the description is adopter name. And like I said, it's going to be a single line of text. So leave it as it is. Leave the format the same way it is as text. For behavior, leave it as simple, required, optional. Everything looks good, and just hit save to create that column real quick. All right, moving on to the next one. The next one is a forever family column. And as you can see, it has a long line of text. Some of them are even going into the next screen. So let's just create this real quick. So the column name is Forever Family Story. And I'm going to name this. All right, so I called it Pet Forever Family Story. That's the display name. For the description, I just put Forever Family Story of the pet from the adopter. And for data type, instead of single line of text, we are going to be modifying this. So we're still going to be using text, but we are going to be using text area. So data type is going to be single line of text. The format is going to be text area. The behavior is going to be simple. Required is optional. And then under the options, the advanced options pane, we are going to increase the max count and just make it 400 to be on the safe side. And then once that's done, let's hit save. And that's just to accommodate for the extremely long line of text when we need to import. And that is good. So let's move on to the next column. And we are almost done. We just have 5 more columns left. So we have date of arrival next, which is going to be a date field. Let's just go ahead and build that real quick. Okay, so I named it pet date of arrival for the display name. The description is date a pet arrived at the shelter. Data type is going to be a date only field. So go to date and time. And for the drop down, instead of date and time, pick date only. So the data type is going to be data type. Format is going to be date only. Leave the behavior as simple. Required optional is fine. And then click save to create our new column. And let's go on to the next one, which is going to be our date of foster and then date of adoption. So let's build both of them real quick. Data type is going to be date only. That looks good, and just hit save. And then pet's date of adoption is next. And then for data type, same thing as before, dates only, and that should be good. Just hit save. All right, let's go back to our Excel spreadsheet again. And we have next vet date, and that's a date only field. Awesome. And then for date field, it's going to be date only. And that should be good. Just hit save. And our final column is going to be next vets. All right, for the final column, next vets, you could be tempted to create this as a choice column, but looking at the values, for example, the follow-up for hip dysplasia, it looks like something that was randomly entered by a shelter staff, and it's not like they are following a list. So I'm gonna err to caution, and instead of creating a choice field, I'm gonna give it a little bit more flexibility and just make it a regular text field. So the shelter staff can actually just put in whatever information they wanted to put in without having to follow a strict guideline when it comes to a choice field. All right, so let's just go ahead and create this in the Dataverse. All right, so we're back in the Dataverse, and let's create our final column. So new column, and I'm gonna name this. All right, so I named it pets next vet, and for description, it is next vet appointment details. And then for data type, we're gonna modify this. So I want to give them enough space to write their data. So this is going to be a text area. And you can leave it a single line of text, but I want to give them more space. This is going to be a text area. So data type is going to be single line of text. Format is going to be text area. Behavior, leave it as simple. Required as optional. And then for the options tab, open the advanced options. And let's make this 300. So the shortest scarf can have more flexibility in entering their data, and then just hit save. And with that, we have just one more column to create, which is the current location. Like before, I said we're going to leave that column as the last column we're going to create. So let's just go back to our Excel spreadsheet again. So the current location uses the initial shelter column and uses the foster claimer column, and also uses the date of adoption column to come up with the values that you see here. So let's just go ahead and I'll show you using the column in the Dataverse. So remember, this is going to be a calculator column first of all. So click on new column, and then we're going to name this column And the name I chose is pet current location. The description is current location of the pet. For the data type, we are going to be using a calculator column, so just leave it as formula. And under the formula, we are going to be putting this formula. I'm going to first show you the formula on a Word notepad before we put it in the formula so we can explain it better. Because if I put it here, it's going to be all squished up and we won't be able to see it real good. All right, so this is going to be the formula we're going to be using for our pet current location. And it's basically checking three things. The first thing it's going to do is it's going to check if the animal is adopted and has a foster claimer, emphasis on the and. So it's checking if both of them are true. So if they are both true and it's using the pet's date of adoption and the foster claimer ID to check if both of them are true. So if they are both true and they have values in them, they need to return an empty string. That's the first check. The second check is if it's going to check if the animal has a foster claimer and has an initial shelter, emphasis on the and. So if checks if both foster claimer ID and shelter ID, if both are not blank, it will return the foster ID. That's the second check. Third check is it will check if the animal shelter, so if the shelter ID is not blank too, then it will return the shelter ID. So those are the three checks it will check. After checking all that, the final thing it will return is still going to be an empty string. And this is going to be the code. All right, so I'm just going to copy this code and paste it in our formula bar. And you can pause to type it in. I'm also going to leave this in the description of the YouTube video, just in case you need to copy and paste it. And then when you're done, just let's go down a little to make sure the format is right. So the format says text, which is fine because we want it in the text format. And just hit save to save our calculator column. Awesome. And with that, we are finally done with all our columns. The next thing we need to do is import our data. So just switch to the table view and go straight to import. And let's import data. And I'm just going to go straight to browse. Let's pick our animal table. Click open. All right. And when you get to the screen, we're going to pick sheet 1. All right, that looks good. Hit next. And give it some time to load. All right, that looks good. Let's hit next again. And this time around, it's time to find our table. So first, load to an existing table. Let's look for our table. All right, so I found my table. The name of our table is the animal information table. And I'm going to use auto map first and see how much luck we can get with the auto mapping. No such luck with auto mapping, so we're going to have to do this manually, starting with the microchip ID. So just hit the drop down menu, look for your microchip ID, and map them one to one. Next one is pet adopter, pet date of adoption, pet date of arrival. And I'll be back when I'm done mapping all of them. Okay, so we are back and all the fields have been mapped accordingly. And once you're done mapping the available fields, just hit next. And when you get here, just hit publish to start grabbing our data. And just like before, I like to go to the edit to wait for my data to come in. Now this should be about 50 rows, so it's gonna take a while. We're just gonna keep refreshing until we get all our data. I'm already expecting not to get all the columns filled, mostly because I didn't see them when we were mapping, which is fine. It's expected. While that's still going on, let's just arrange our tables columns. So microchip ID is first. And then let's see what else we can grab out. Name, type, date of birth, date of arrival, date of foster. Mm-hmm. All right, I'm just gonna save this and then let's see whether if we've gotten our data yet. Awesome. And with our data in, I'm gonna modify this so it looks exactly like the Excel spreadsheet and then I'll be back. So give me a minute. Okay, so I'm back and this should look exactly just like the Excel spreadsheet in the same order from left to right. And the trick is when you're selecting the fields, it's first in, first out. So as you can see, we don't have any values for our pet initial shelter and our current location. And also we don't have any values for our foster claimer. Those are going to have to be inputted manually, but every other column has values, including the pet next vet date. So if you go down, you will still have values for this. So the only three columns we need to fill out are going to be these three. All right, to fix this issue, first of all, I'm just going to move pet shelter status to the right so we have all our fields in the same place. And then I'm going to sort. So just scroll to the left and we're looking for our animal name. So I'm going to sort based on pet name. And then after I sort based on the pet name here, I'm going to go to our Excel table and do the same thing there. Sort A to Z2. So now I know that all my columns actually match if you sort them by name. And I would suggest putting this side by side with your column and then making sure that you fill out the values for the current location based on this sorting order. So for example, if I go over here, Bailey should have for Bailey, if we go over to the Excel spreadsheet, And I'm going to hide photo ID just so I can get a clearer view of what I am. I'm also going to hide the shelter status. And I'm going to look at these three columns and I'm okay. For Bailey, it's SO1 for initial shelter and FH001 for foster claimer. So just double click. For initial shelter is SO1, and then for foster claimer, double click and pick 001. And once you're done with that, if you click anywhere on the screen, it will populate based on, and there we go. So it has figured out using calculator column to say, okay, based on these two fields, and also remember, it's also checking the date of adoption. This is the final answer we will get for our current location. And we're going to do all the way to the bottom. So one by one, I want you to take your time. Remember, first sort by name on both sheets. So in the Dataverse and in your Excel, before you start inputting this data in. And with that, we are done with creating all our tables, adding all the columns for all our tables, and importing all the data into the Dataverse. Goodbye.